All right, so since we just did aggregate demand, now we're covering the other side of the equation, aggregate supply. So for this, it obviously is going to mimic a lot of uh, the regular supply curve, but this is going to be just like aggregate demand, aggregate. So it's going to be the summation of all production in a society. So when we look at it with relation to the different axes in our aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, we've got price level still on the Y, real GDP still on the X, and SRAS, or short run aggregate supply, being upward sloping. There's also a second supply curve, the LRAS. That's going to be the long run aggregate supply. And we're going to discuss these two curves and what they both mean throughout this presentation. So first of all, of course, why is it upward sloping? It's this upward sloping essentially for the same reason that your regular supply curve is upward sloping. Profit per unit increases as uh, your price level goes up. So you supply more as price level increases. Same exact idea as the supply curve normally. Now, there is, however, an added trick with this that we'll go over more when we do Keynesian economics, and it's the concept of stickiness, which essentially says that um, you're going to move slowly along the short run aggregate supply curve due to issues, usually contracts and things like that, or sociological issues that don't allow immediate movement along the short run aggregate supply curve. This eventually does lead to some issues. And once again, we'll explore those more when we do Keynesian economics. So, for shifting the short run aggregate supply curve, um, these are very much in line with the same ideas as the regular supply curve and the supply and demand model. So, if you think of changes in commodity prices, this is basically like an input price, a change in an input price. Only a commodity is a broad scale input. It is used in many, many different final products. So think of things like oil, copper, steel, anything like that. Um, Obviously, an increase in commodity prices will decrease short run aggregate supply, and a decrease in commodity prices will increase short run aggregate supply. Changes in nominal wages, they work the same way as commodity prices. So as nominal wages increase, your short run aggregate supply will decrease. As nominal wages decrease, your short run aggregate supply will increase. And changes in productivity in general. So if the economy for some reason gets more productive in the short run, your short run aggregate supply will shift to the right. Less productive, it will shift to the left. Now for the long run curve, you'll notice the long run curve is vertical, or in econ speak, it is perfectly inelastic. So in the long run, there's no incentive to increase production level because you actually can't do that. You're at your potential output. This is how much the economy can produce if all prices are fully flexible. So in other words, we've already been using all of our resources to their fullest, at least at what matters in the long run. You do have some short run ability to move beyond that LRAS, usually due to um, short run incentives, especially in the labor market. The long run aggregate supply, however, can shift as long as your economy's potential output has increased. And this is due to things like better technology, larger workforce, more educated workforce, things like that. Now, this should all sound familiar to you because it's really very close to being another representation of the PPC, your production possibilities curve. Now, the difference being that the production possibility curve showed the opportunity cost of producing one good versus more of one good versus less of another. This just shows sort of like your total production as if you lumped all of that in one thing and labeled it in terms of real GDP. So it's very, very similar. So if your LRAS shifts to the right, if it increases, that means your PPC also shifted outward as well. If your PPC shifted inward, your LRAS shifted to the left. Now, you can go from the short run to the long run. Um, your economy is going to generally fluctuate around the level of potential output. So it's going to move around the LRAS either to the left or the or to the right, but always on the SRAS. It's really going to be, once we introduce aggregate demand back into the mix, it's going to be at the intersection of your short run aggregate supply and your aggregate demand curve. So it's always going to move around the potential output. But in the long run, it will always go back to your long run aggregate supply. It will always readjust. And that's going to be caused by shifts of the short run aggregate supply curve. And once again, this is stuff that we'll get into a bit, why that occurs and how exactly that occurs a bit later on. For now, just know that it does occur. And that's all you have to know for now for the short run aggregate supply curve.